You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 102. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Marc Cameron, who is the author of the New York Times best-selling Jericho Quinn Thriller series. His short stories have appeared in the Saturday Evening Post and Boys Life magazine. In 2016, he was chosen to continue the Tom Clancy Jack Ryan campus thriller series. Tom Clancy Code of Honor was the latest book he released in that series, which was published in November of 2019. And the 20th Jack Ryan novel is scheduled to be published this November, written by Marc Cameron. His latest novel, Stone Cross, was published in March, and it's an action-packed crime thriller and the second book in his Arliss Cutter series. Marc Cameron has a fascinating background, having retired as a Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal who spent nearly 30 years in law enforcement. His assignments have taken him from Alaska to Manhattan, Canada to Mexico, and dozens of points in between. He holds a second-degree black belt in Jiu-Jitsu and is a certified scuba diver and man-tracking instructor. A native of Texas, he now lives in Alaska, where he writes his action-packed books. I had a great time chatting with Marc about his background with the U.S. Marshals, and yes, I did ask him about the accuracy of the great U.S. Marshal character played so wonderfully by Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive, one of my favorite movies. I also asked him about the pressure of carrying on the iconic Jack Ryan character created by Tom Clancy, and a whole lot more. So we'll be listening to that interview coming up here in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about Masterclass. They keep putting out some amazing online courses. Right now, there's over 80 courses from some incredible minds out there from the movies, television, sports, music, fashion, culinary world. You can watch thousands of lessons from the best as they share their stories, skills, shortcuts, failures, and successes. And as fans of the thriller mystery genre, you can check out the Masterclass from Dan Brown, James Patterson, and David Baldacci. I found those to be inspiring and very helpful in my own writing endeavors. And if you sign up using my link, thrillingreads.com/masterclass, you'll be helping supporting this podcast. And so I appreciate you checking it out. Okay, so here is my interview with Marc Cameron. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Meet the Thriller Author. And I have Marc Cameron on Zoom. How are you doing, Marc?
Hey, doing very well. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast. Hopefully everything's going all right with you and your family during this pandemic times. Hope everyone's okay.
Yeah, we're doing great. I have found that I probably enjoy self-isolation much more than I should. It's not too bad for me.
Yeah, that has been that has been something that I've enjoyed as well too. My wife's now working from home, so it's been a big change for her, but we've been doing well with it.
Good, I'm glad to hear it.
I'm a big fan of your books. I've read your Jack Ryan books. I will get into that a little bit later here, but I was fascinated to find out that you spent 30 years in law enforcement, and you retired as a Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal. Were you dreaming of being a writer even back then when you were tracking down fugitives?
Oh yeah, I knew when I was a little boy that I wanted to be a Deputy U.S. Marshal, and I wanted to be a writer. I knew I wanted to be in police work. And then as I got older and started, especially once I got into police work as a patrol officer in Texas and worked with different agencies, I knew then that the Marshal service was going to be the best job for me, hunting bad guys. And so, but I knew all along when I was newlywed, even before we were married, I told my wife that I wanted to be a novelist, and people have known me, have heard the story, but our first year of marriage, she bought me a Smith Corona electric typewriter and a bulletproof vest because they didn't buy them for us back then. So she was very supportive early on.
Oh, that's awesome. So you could do both jobs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, mostly I just got a lot of rejection letters for years, but I just enjoyed writing, so I kept it up, and it turned out after 20 years of rejection letters.
So I have to ask you, because one of my favorite movies, you probably have been asked this before, but one of my favorite movies is The Fugitive. So how realistic was that? I love Tommy Lee Jones.
In some ways it was very realistic. In other ways, not so much. I mean, the fact that the Tommy Lee Jones kind of comes onto the scene and takes over the investigation and all of that doesn't happen. We realize as Deputy U.S. Marshals that we can't get by without, we can't do our job without the assistance and teamwork of the state and local agencies that we work with and alongside. But the probably the truest, most telling part of that whole movie is the line that everybody remembers probably, where Harrison Ford's about to jump. He's standing at the little mouth of that dam, and he's got his hands up, and Tommy Lee Jones is drawn down on him, and Harrison Ford character says, Richard Kimball says, "I didn't kill my wife." And remember what Tommy Lee Jones says? He said, Deputy Gerard says, "I don't care." That's kind of the way we have to be. Our job is to look at the name on that warrant and go after them. And we don't decide guilt or innocence. We decide that person needs to be back before the judge or back in jail. And so we don't really look at the, why, where, when, that sort of thing. We're focused on the who.
Yeah, let the courts and everything else do it their part, exactly. Their part of the job.
Exactly. So in some ways, it's really there were some Deputy U.S. Marshals that acted as consultants on that. So the badges were right, the gun, the Glocks that they carried were correct for the agency, but it's Hollywood.
Yeah, you gotta make it a little exciting.
Yeah, exactly.
So when did you finally get your first book published? When was that?
I went to I had a couple published locally in Alaska, and then by a local publisher here, and then I had joined the Western Writers of America, and I had a Western that I'd written that I really liked, not contemporary, but like in the mid 1900s, not a old time shootouts on the street Western, but something set in North Idaho, and we were living in North Idaho at the time, kind of by the Canadian border, and I had written a Western that I liked, and so I went to this conference in Helena, Montana, and pitched it, and ended up selling a Western under the pen name of Mark Henry. Sold a couple of those Westerns, and ghost wrote for another Western author that, where my name didn't appear on the cover, and then eventually switched over to thrillers, which is what law enforcement, military style thrillers, which is what I'd kind of set out to write in the first place. But I think it was probably 2003, 2006, something like, I guess 2006 when I actually got the book published. And then 2011 is when I published my first Jericho Quinn Thriller.
And were you a fan of the thriller genre before you started to write them?
I started reading, when I was in police work, I read a lot of Joseph Wambaugh. I liked crime novels. I started reading Tom Clancy when I was, when he first put out Hunt for Red October. So in fact, I was a rookie police officer at the time going through the police academy. And so I followed Clancy as I grew up in the Marshal service. I remember going to an advanced school and buying The Sum of All Fears in paperback. And that was in the early 90s, I think 94, something like 95. I can't remember when it came out in paperback, but I bought the paperback and I accidentally left it in the back of my plane seat. And when I got off the plane, so I had to go buy it again. And then when I was on a protective detail. Actually, that's what it was. It wasn't a training. I was on a protective detail in New York, and I'd left it in my plane seat, and then I got off, went into the command post, and I was assigned to another agency, and a special agent with this other agency picked it up and started reading it, and so I went and bought another one. So I ended up buying Sum of All Fears 3 times just to get it finished. So I followed through, a lot of spy stuff I really enjoy. I enjoyed Ken Follett and a lot of his World War II stuff. I like Frederick Forsyth, and I love really any kind of well-written book, whether it's thriller or whatever. I enjoy literature.
And so your latest book is Stonecross, which is available now. It's published March 31st, and that's the second book in the Arliss Cutter series. Can you tell us about that book?
Sure. I think if I were to say, and that, so far, including my written work, I've written 21 books, and out of all those 21 novels, Stone Cross is the most has the most of me in it. I think I did a lot of work with the U.S. Marshal Service out in Bush, Alaska, in the rural areas that are not connected to the road system. You have to take a plane to get there or a boat, and which is the vast majority of the land in Alaska is only reachable that way. And so, and the native peoples out there, the Yupik and the Inupiaq and the Athabascan peoples, I've got friends that I met while I was with the Marshal Service that have remained my friends. So I've been retired almost 7 years now. And so I've always wanted to tell a bit of their story. And Stone Cross is a fictional village, but based on some of the villages that I've spent time in and when I was with the Marshals, working alongside in a partnership with the troopers. This is a story that I wanted to tell a long time ago, but I was not in a position to write it, and things have gotten a little, I've gotten a little better seat at the table as a writer, so I could decide a little more what I wanted to write. And Stone Cross is definitely, out of all my books, I mean, I like my books myself, or I wouldn't write them. I like stories, but Stone Cross is my personal favorite.
Yeah, this was what I was going to say when I was reading that the Arliss Cutter is a U.S. Marshal in Alaska, and you were a U.S.
Yeah,
Marshal in Alaska. So a little semi-autobiographical, a little bit,
yeah.
or
I think Arliss Cutter is way cooler than I am. I'm more like the chief that stays in the office a good deal of the time. But I did when I first moved to Alaska. I was assigned to the Alaska Fugitive Task Force, which is now that is run by a supervisor. When I moved to Alaska, we affectionately call it a POD, a plain old deputy. I didn't have any supervisory roles, but I was put with the task force and so the deputy in charge of that task force back before it was a supervisor running it. So I got that same experience and got to travel around the state and do some pretty neat investigations. Tracking the book before Stone Cross is set down in on Prince Wales Island, which is, I can't remember, I think it's like the third largest island in the United States, but it's down kind of close to Ketchikan and Juneau and that southeast panhandle part of Alaska. But it's quite remote. You have to take a ferry or an airplane to get there, and it's but a lot of roads, and it's got a couple of big, larger towns, and then a lot of smaller villages as well, native villages. And we tracked a guy. We were called down there. A guy chopped another man's head off with a splitting maul and then fled into the woods. And so almost 20 years ago, the fugitive task force, and then I was a man tracker at the time for the district, part of the tactical tracking unit. And so they called us down there, some of the task force members, and then me as a tracker, and we tracked this guy. And I just remember thinking, man, what a great setting for a book. And I wasn't writing as much at the time because I was so caught up in my Marshal Service career, but I had always been writing. And tracking this guy that was suspected of a homicide through these old growth forests that looked like something out of a Tolkien movie, with moss and darkness and the little bit of rain falling above, but it didn't even make it to the ground because the canopy was so thick. And so I really kind of set these books then 20 years ago, and then came back and wrote Open Carry, which is set in that same place. And Arliss Cutter is just sort of a amalgam of the great men and women I've met over the years in law enforcement, and sort of the hero archetype that I've been able to work with. So it's been fun.
yeah, something I've seen a lot in your reviews is they mention a lot of actions, great thrillers, but then also a lot about how you bring the Alaskan wilderness to life, which I think is
Oh, that's good.
kind of cool.
That's good. I'm glad to hear it. I feel like Alaska is a character in the books. Alaska is so big. I mean, I've wanted to get to Alaska since I was a little boy. I grew up in Texas, and I remember going to a state fair in Dallas and getting a big map of Canada and Alaska. Actually, it was like Yukon British Columbia, Yukon, and Alaska. They had some tourism booth there, and going home with my mom. And I was probably 9 or 10, and going home with my mom and kind of planning a big trip up there. We never went, but I read everything I could about it and just kind of slowly worked my way north, in my career. So I had actually applied with the North Slope Borough Police Department. I was working with the police department in Texas, and I applied with North Slope Borough, which handles the top third of Alaska as one big community, and made up a big borough like you'd call a county in the lower 48. And they're one police department. I'd applied with them. I was in the middle of that process when the Marshal Service hired me, and so I kind of sidestepped over, worked for the Marshal Service for 7 years before I was able to transfer to Alaska.
Wow, so you've always had Alaska in your mind.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's we like to joke that step out of the RV and into the food chain up here. It's still the frontier, and it's one of the few places that you have to, that it's a smart thing to actually, you have a need to carry a sidearm when you go out into the woods. I mean, I have carried one for 30 years now anyway, 35 years, but here it's truly a good thing to you're not the top of the food chain.
Yeah, I always hear that's like the last American frontier that's left,
Yep,
really.
yep, it really is, and we love it.
Yeah, I haven't made it up there yet, but I'll have to make it one of these years.
Yeah, it's a good place. It's a very good place.
I really enjoyed your. I first came found out about you through your Jack Ryan books. I read
Hmm.
Code of Honor, and
Hmm.
it was a great book with all the AI
Thank you.
technology stuff. It was kind
Hmm.
of on point with what's going on here in the last few years.
Yeah.
What was that whole process? I mean, you said you were a Tom Clancy fan before. I can't even imagine what it would be to step in and pick up that mantle. How did that whole work out for you? Did they approach you, or do you have to audition, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's terrifying, and it's not something that you apply for. I had zero idea that I was being considered, and I was fortunate enough to meet Mark Graney, who wrote them before I did, at Thriller Fest. I mean, not Thriller Fest, at BoucherCon, Writers Conference in Long Beach. I met him there, and we became acquainted and chatted. And then through subsequent BoucherCons and Thriller Fest, we got to know one another better. I had dinner a few times. My wife and I had dinner with him and his wife, and we, became friends over the years. And I can't remember which one it was, but I think it was New Orleans. We were chatting, and he said I had a new Jericho that was in Jericho Quinn, which is my original Thriller series. That I had, it was in the editorial process, and he just approached me and said, "Hey, do you want me to give you a cover blurb?" And that's a big deal in the writing world. And I hate to ask other authors for blurbs. For quotes, I just hate it because I know how busy everybody is, and I'm happy to give quotes to people that are, that I've met. And I have been very fortunate that Brad Thor and CJ Box and Mark Graney have given me and cover quotes, and Steve Berry has given me one. And so the only people I've ever asked have been Brad Thor and CJ Box, and I was fortunate they did it. And so Mark offered without being asked, and he's a top tier writer, and I said, yeah, that would be fantastic. And he said, well, send me the PDF. Well, I sent him the PDF of Field of Fire, which was the Jericho two Jerichos ago, so number 8, I think. And unbeknownst to me, he was thinking about stepping away from the Tom Clancy Jack Ryans that he was doing, because he had done 7, and he just forwarded Field of Fire onto Tom Colgan, the editor. And so then Tom read it, and I guess he liked it enough to approach my agent, Robin Rue. And I was down in Florida with my wife doing some research on the first Arliss Cutter novel, and because I was going to be doing a Jericho and then a Cutter and a Jericho and a Cutter. And my agent called me and said they want to hire you to do the next Jack Ryan. So I was, nearly fell down. My wife has a picture of me. She saw me talking to Rob, and she knew it was my agent. And for some reason, I don't know if she thought I was having a heart attack or what, but she snapped a photo of it. So there's this. It looks like somebody's died or something. There's kind of this grief-stricken picture of me standing in the breeze on the beach in Manasota Key, Florida, talking about getting the Clancy gig, and I looked pretty sick to my stomach. But I was terrified, absolutely terrified, but happy.
Yeah, that sounds good. I can just imagine the excitement, but then the fear.
Oh yeah, and as a matter of fact, today I just heard that the news is out that Don Bentley is going to be doing he wrote a fantastic book called Without Sanction, that he's going to be doing the Jack Ryan Jr. series. He's taking that over from Mike Madden, who's also a friend of mine. So Mike's stepping away to work on some other projects, and Don's going to be taking over those. So he's former FBI. So I'm really looking forward to working with Don on, just we don't really work together on the books, but we alternate. He does a Jack Ryan Jr. and I'll do a Jack Ryan Sr. So that'll be great fun. So I know he's probably going through the same agonizing terror. You have to have some hubris to just sit down and write and think anybody wants to read your stuff, but it's still, you're a writer. It's a two-edged sword. You want to push out your work, and then you're terrified people are going to discover that you're, you know.
Yeah, we're really, yeah, it's like a little bit disturbed in that way.
Yeah, I think that's just the typical writer's brain. Like, here, read this. It's great. It's horrible. Give it back. No, but I want you to read it.
Yeah. Yeah, or like you write and somebody that you know or admire or whatever reads your book and you cringe, but you want them to read
Yeah,
it.
exactly. I think there's a lot of writers that have that,
Oh
diagnosis,
yeah.
that imposter syndrome, where I'm constantly worried that whenever my editor agent calls me, I'm worried they're going to say, "Oh man, we thought you were somebody else. What have we been what have we been wasting our time with you on for 17 years for?"
Yeah, I've interviewed over 100 thriller writers so far for this podcast, and that comes up a lot. So
Yeah, it's
in all
common.
different levels. So
Very common, sadly.
yeah. Well, so you have three Tom Clancy thriller Jack Ryan books out now, right? And I believe a
Hmm.
fourth one's coming out in November.
Yeah, I'm working on it now. I'm really, neck deep in it now. I finished the third cutter, and it's in the editorial process. My wife and I go to Rarotonga every year for a couple of months, and so I finished the third Arliss cutter. It's called Bone Rattle. It's being worked on through the copy editing process now, and so I've been since February. I've been working on really late January. I've been working on the next it'll be my fourth Jack Ryan novel. So we're gonna have that one and then one more. I have a contract for two more, and then we'll see.
Oh, for the Jack Ryans.
Yep.
Oh, cool. So you only work like on one book at a time. Like if you're working on the Jack Ryan, and then you'll go to one of your series, or
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the meat of the project, I doing two books a year. They always overlap. So I'm working on this, and normally, and were it not for the pandemic, I'd be out on trying to get aboard a fast attack sub to interview some people, and I had some folks helping me with the icebreakers, some interviews, and different things that I was going to be, utilizing in the book. And now there's a lot of phone calls and putting yourself through it. To write a Tom Clancy Jack Ryan novel is really like putting yourself through a couple of semesters of nuclear physics and you know geopolitical conflict and whatnot. So there there's just a lot of reading and studying and interviewing, which I enjoy. I just absolutely love that. And normally there's a lot of traveling. So for Code of Honor, I was able to fly on, B-22 Ospreys. And so when I, and sail past I didn't go on an aircraft carrier, but we were on some smaller vessels and would have gone on an aircraft carrier. We just ran out of time. But just able to talk to a lot of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, Coast Guardsmen. And be able to chat with when you're able to sit down and actually worked out in Coronado with the like 40 minutes of Hell Week with some SEALs yelling at us, and the experiences doing stuff like that just really make it so that when I'm able to when I get to write about have the opportunity to write about a let's say a V-22 Osprey flight, then I can call up this young captain that I know and say, "Hey, tell me about what it feels like to when you're leaving the deck. Tell me about what you say. Tell me about." So I just really that's to me that's the absolute best part of writing these Tom Clancy's is the doors it opens and the people I'm able to meet. And there's so much crap going on in the world right now, both politically and medically, that there's nothing that buoys me up more than when I can talk to some of our young troops and listen to how intelligent they are and well read and critical thinkers and pretty amazing young people. And that's that gives me hope because I have young children, young grandchildren and adult children that are you know in the workforce, and I just like to see that our world's in good hands. And so when I watch the news, I get depressed, and then when I talk to the real people out on the front lines, I go, okay, it's
Yeah.
not so bad. It's pretty good. There's some really fantastic folks out there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's yeah. I think that's in all those frontline type people. I mean, all the work that they do,
Yeah,
and I mean, yeah,
absolutely.
it's just yeah, it kind of restores hope on humanity, like you say,
Yeah,
especially after
yeah,
watching the
exactly.
news.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Just make our own news as fiction writers, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I was that was fascinating about the research because I was going to ask you about that because Tom Clancy's books are known for the meticulous research. So yeah, it's interesting to see that you had to step into that world.
Yeah, it's been really nice. When I try to research and write what I know, and being in federal law enforcement, I'm fortunate to have plenty of contacts around the country that are in all branches of the FBI, Secret Service, uh, State Department, the agency, all sorts of things. So I have lots of contacts, so I can draw from them, and then being in my own share of human conflict and being around firearms for my whole life, then that part of it comes pretty smoothly for me. I really enjoy writing fight scenes. I've been in martial arts for a number of years, and I have a really dear friend. He's more like a brother. That he's a 10th dan in jiu-jitsu. He just got awarded his 10th degree, which is about as high as you can go. And basically they confer upon him the right to have his own school and line of teaching. So he was my partner with the Marshal Service for a number of years, and Ty Cunningham's his name. And so whenever I write a fight scene, I I generally am on the phone with Ty, or in past day he lives down in Southeast Alaska, and in past days I've been able to go down and visit with him and walk through some things, and and I mean I have some fairly deep in-depth experience with martial arts, but he's vastly past me when it comes to that, and so um, it's really fun for me. I mean, I just love writing fight scenes and gun scenes and um, that sort of thing. And those are sort of the bread and butter of the books, and interspersed with the people side of things.
And what's the writing day for you like when you're working on a project? Do you like have like word count goals that you have to reach, or do you always write in the same
Yeah,
spot?
no, I write everywhere. I write wherever I am. I had a college professor that told me, like, it was my freshman year, said if you will never amount to your full potential unless you learn to use those little 15-minute segments of your life that everybody else wastes. And so I carry a notepad around with me. If I've got some downtime, I try very hard not to get on Twitter or Angry Birds or whatever, and try to just, make notes and look at people around me and observe. And um, so, well, that's what I was going to say earlier. As far as working on one project at a time, I'm working on the Clancy now, but at some point, but then I'm doing an interview with you first on Cross, right? So even though I'm in the middle of the the meat of the Clancy project, then I'm still, I'll at some point here in the next few weeks, I'll get the copy edits back for Bone Rattle, which is the third cutter, and I'll have to step away from the Clancy for a week and go back over those copy edits and do my rewrites and things like that. But even then, the book's written and I'm doing rewrites. Even then, though, by then I'm so in depth with the Clancy that I won't be able to stay away from it. I just enjoy it. So I try to get 2,000 words a day, but some days I'll get 1,000 and do the rest of just research. But typical writing day for me is get up and answer emails and um, start writing and get 500 or 600 words done, and then I'll get to a part where I think I might need to go read a bit or watch some YouTube videos or talk to someone about this area, so I get it in my head, and then I'll try not to spend more than an hour doing that, and then I'll jump back and write some more. And then when we were writing the first, I say we because my wife really helps me a ton with research and editing and all that. We had we had Power and Empire was, since it was my first Clancy, I was sending them a few chapters at a time. Like now, when the book's done, I send it in. But back then, they had my other books, but I was an unknown quantity as far as a Clancy writer for them. So I was submitting like 8 or 10 chapters at a time. And as I said, kind of terrified. So my wife and I had already planned this trip to Rarotonga in the Cook Islands, which is out in the middle of the South Pacific, kind of down by Fiji and Tahiti, kind of in between. And it's a small island. It takes about 45 minutes to drive around. It's pretty sparsely populated, and we've got great friends there. So we were in this little bungalow, and I'd get up in the morning and I'd write for about, try to get the bones of a chapter done, and then I would read a paperback, lay in the hammock on the beach and read a paperback Clancy, and then I would have lunch, and then after lunch I would study a bunch of stuff that I knew I needed to write about, different research that I'd brought with me, and then write some more, and then my wife would read to me as I was falling asleep from a different Clancy. And so we really, we stayed there at that point. I think we stayed almost 3 months, and we put ourselves through kind of a Clancy university and read much every original, legacy Tom Clancy, and then several of Marc's while I was there too, to get myself up to speed while I was writing Power and Empire.
So it's like a writing retreat / Tom Clancy University.
Yeah, exactly. It will always be a very fond memory because we were so immersed in it. I mean, there was just, I went to sleep listening to my wife read. In fact, I think as the last month there, she was reading me Commander-in-Chief, which was one of Mark Graney's Clancy's, so I could kind of get back up to speed with where the series is at now.
And what do you use to write? Do you use like a Word or some other software program?
Yeah, I use Word. I've been thinking about going to Scrivener, and I've dabbled in it, but I'm so, I mean, I type the end on one book, and the next morning it's Once Upon a Time or the next one, and so I really don't have time haven't taken the time to learn a new software. So I write Word, and I write a good deal of the original manuscript, especially the notes and plotting. I'm a pretty intensive plotter in longhand, in either pencil or fountain pen. So like right now I'm at my desk. I've got 3 big coffee mugs full of Palomino Blackwing 602 pencils that are just probably 150 of them here that I work my way through, and these yellow notepads and taking notes. I just like the way pencils feel, and plus I like the way that your brain works when you can't cut and paste. When you're really writing and play, it becomes, to my mind, I don't know, it's just a different way of thinking. It becomes fun and art instead of a drudgery. So I'd say I write quite a bit of the first draft. Maybe a third of the first draft will be in pencil, which means that by the time it's on the computer, it's a second draft already.
Oh, so. Yeah, it saves a step.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, that's awesome. So, well, I'm not going to keep you too much longer, but before I let you go, one question I always ask, because I have a lot of aspiring writers that are listening to this. Any advice?
Well, I'd say listen to podcasts like this. I mean, it sounds kind of self-serving, but listen to how the other writers do it. And if when I give anybody advice, I'm using with my own experience, and much of my success, other than having sitting down and actually writing the book, has come from meeting other writers and going to conferences. And um, it's just so difficult now because so many people are writing. I mean, everybody's got a laptop and a story to tell can now be a writer. And so that's great for writers, but it's really difficult for writers that want to be published, because we're everywhere. It's really truly a buyer's market for the publishers. And so you have to do something to stand apart. And the way to do that is to meet editors and agents and other writers and have them introduce you, not in a conniving, planned way, but just go be a good person and help out, and help hand out the amenity bags and backpacks at VoucherCon or Thriller Fest or whatever. And then people start to get to know you as a person and somebody that, because it's a business. And then an editor and an agent are more likely to say, oh, I'd really like to work with him or her. They seem squared away. They seem easygoing. And if you've got 10 people that can write a decent story, but 2 of them seem like interesting, squared away folks, who are they going to choose? So on the publishing side, that would be my advice.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for being on the podcast. It's a real pleasure talking to you and learning more about your work and your background.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Alan. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Meet the Thriller Author podcast. Be sure to visit thrillerauthors.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover great thrilling reads. If you enjoy the podcast, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review to it wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast, be it iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, wherever it is that you're listening to this right now. I would appreciate it. And please do check out my own thriller novels over at my website at alanpeterson.com. Until next time.